Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at wargaming on a budget, getting into wargaming without spending a huge amount of money. So let's crack on. Miniature wargaming is quite a thrilling and immersive hobby that combines strategy, creativity and social interaction. It can, however, seem like an expensive pursuit, with armies, rulebooks, paints, terrain, and it all adds up pretty quickly. But don't be discouraged, because with a few smart strategies, you can get into miniature wargaming without breaking the bank. And in this video, we're going to start looking at how you can do that and start your journey into the world of wargaming on a budget. Now, one of the first things you could do is to start small and start with Skirmish Games. And these are one of the easiest ways to keep costs down when starting out, is to choose a skirmish game rather than a full-scale war game. And skirmish games typically involve fewer models, miniatures, and they can be anywhere from say 5 to sort of 20 models, which means you don't need to invest in a huge army, which is generally one of the bigger costs of wargaming. So there are some affordable skirmish games out there. You've got a fantasy like Frostgrave, that's quite popular. This is where small war bands battle in an ancient frozen city. It's miniature agnostic, so you can use any models you can find and afford. Similar to Frostgrave is Stargrave, which is a sci-fi set in a science fiction universe, and this skirmish game also supports you using whatever models you can find. You're not stuck to using one particular manufacturer's models. Now, these are games that are a great way into the hobby with fewer miniatures, and so that lowers the financial commitment somewhat. The other one is to start looking for miniature deals. Miniatures are often the largest cost when starting out, but there are quite a few ways in which you can find them at a lower price, such as second-hand miniatures, checking out online marketplaces like eBay, looking through local classifieds, ads, Facebook groups. A lot of hobbyists tend to sell armies and miniatures they no longer use, because they're going to use that money to buy a new one. And some may even offer miniatures that are already assembled and painted, which will save you a lot of time as well as money. Now, there are also starter sets in wargaming. Many companies offer affordable starter sets that come with everything you'll need to get started, such as 2 armies, rulebooks, dice, everything like that. And sometimes you may even get terrain in those starter sets. So a good example of that is things like Games Workshop do it for both their 40k and Age of Sigmar systems, but Warlord do it for a lot of their historical ones. So, and that makes a cost-effective way, especially if you split that cost with a friend. Another one is to use alternative miniatures. So if you're going into a game playing sort of like one of Games Workshop games that was 40k, it's quite known that they're quite expensive to get started with, and so going with cheaper alternatives for miniatures from say companies such as Mantic Games, Warlord, North Star, Reaper could be quite cost effective. They produce a lot of really good miniatures, but they're a lot lower price point than Games Workshop, and you could use those as alternatives. Another one is 3D printing. If you have access to a 3D printer, or you've got a friend who does, 3D printing could be a cost-effective way to build an army. Sites like Thingiverse and My Factory tend to offer free or low-cost printable files for miniatures, and printing them can save you a significant amount of money long term. The other one is budget-friendly hobby supplies. The hobby side of the wargaming, assembling, painting miniatures, can also be quite expensive, especially if you buy your hobby supplies from certain companies. And there are many ways in which you can reduce that cost by buying alternatives from craft stores and stuff like that. As well, things like miniature paints. My opinion is you'll have to bite the bullet on this one. That whilst there are cheap alternative hobby acrylic paints out there, I will personally say that you'll be better off buying paints that are specifically specialized for wargaming. miniatures rather than buying a hobby. So you will have to bite your bullet on that one. Brushes, you don't need to go and buy expensive brushes. I generally regularly buy a pack from the game called the retail company called Range in the UK, and they sell a pack of really good brushes like this in this pack. I think it's 10 for about $2.99. It's about $5. You can make your own washes. So instead of buying expensive pre-made washes, you could DIY and make your own using some brown paint, some water, and a drop of dish soap. And washes are used for generally to bring out the details on miniatures and give them a bit of depth. It's just a quick way to shade, and DIY versions could save you quite a bit of money. Priming. Priming spray primers from hobby companies tend to be quite pricey, and you can find cheaper ones at hardware stores, or but you need to be careful about some of the primers, especially ones for car primers. They tend to spray quite thickly, so you need to be aware of that, but they are a lot cheaper than buying the ones directly from the game's hobby companies. Terrain and battlefields. Now, terrain is an important part of wargaming, but you don't really need to spend a massive amount of money on pre-made terrain kits. You could build your own using bits and pieces from household junk. So creating terrain using like cardboard, foam board, and plastic containers. Basically, packaging from products. Like, for instance, this was a packaging from I think it was electrical goods, and I've just turned that into a building for sci-fi by adding some bits and pieces onto it. Flock and scatter. You can make your own flock for grass by dyeing, say, for instance, sawdust or sponge pieces with paint. You could take small stains from gardens or aquarium gravel. A good one is to get the grit you can buy in packs and pet shop stores for birds. It's quite sand. A lot of it is sand and little bits of stone. That's an inexpensive way of doing it. For the gaming mat, you don't have to go out and buy an expensive one. You could go out and buy a cloth mat or a felt mat or some piece of cloth to use, and just spray some colours onto it or paint some colours onto it to make it a bit more sort of realistic. The next one is rule sets. You don't need to go out and buy expensive rule books. There are a wealth of free and low-cost rule sets available for you to get started with, such as like one-page rules. And these offer pretty streamlined fan-made rule sets for various types of gaming. That includes fantasy, there's sci-fi ones, there's ones out there for historical games. And these will be compatible with all the miniatures you have, and they're a low-cost way to start gaming without purchasing expensive books. I mean, rule books can go from sort of like £20 up to sort of £60, so they're quite expensive. Another one is print and play games. Some of the indie games for historical war games provide rules and even paper miniatures or tokens as free downloads, and these can often be a fun way to get started in wargaming without spending a lot of money up front. Another one is to join wargaming communities and forums, social media, and join your local club, because you'll get a lot of advice, tutorials and inspiration from these people, as well as it's a good way of getting hold of homebrew rule sets and scenarios and various other bits and pieces that people have created for. The other one is, if you've got a group of friends of you going into it, is actually share the resources between you. This could be a great way to save money by pooling resources, sharing the cost for things like terrain and rules and stuff like that. Getting started with 2-player starter sets, you and your friends, split boxes and stuff like that, and that's a good well used sort of way of cutting the costs down, is to go in with a friend on a 2-player starter set. And clubs, clubs will have a lot of their own terrain, so you could be playing games at your clubs and using the terrain that the clubs have without having to actually go out and purchase a ton of terrain for yourself when you get started. And one of the biggest rules, I would say, is to pace yourself. A lot of the biggest mistakes a lot of new people do, and just gamers in general, is buying too much. And rather focus on a small project before moving on to larger ones. Try and sort of get your projects finished before buying new stuff. That's one of the mistakes everyone makes. I make is we go out and purchase one army, start painting it. We see another one. Oh, I like that, and you start, and before you know it, you've got like half a dozen armies you're trying to get painted. A miniature wargaming doesn't have to be an expensive hobby. By starting small, looking for deals, using DIY methods, you can build a really good experience without emptying the wallet and having the bank manager on your back. So, you know, there's a lot of ways of doing it: skirmish, wargaming, alternative miniatures, affordable paints, homemade terrain, and they're all a great way to sort of get started on a budget. And it's just a case of some creativity and patience. You can really enjoy wargaming without having to overspend and make the mistake that a lot of us make, where we buy far too much and we don't actually use half of what we've got. And you'll hear common between wargamers say they've got a grey army. And that basically means they've got a pile of unpainted miniatures they've got to work through. Anyway, that's all for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.